Good evening, my friends. Milestones are the decorative stickers civilization slaps on a conveyor belt so no one notices they're being moved from cradle to coffin on a schedule they never chose. School, job, house, marriage, children, retirement. Each one presented like a grand achievement, when in reality it's just another confirmation that you followed instructions without asking whether the instructions were worth obeying. The applause isn't for you. It's the system congratulating itself for successfully producing yet another compliant life that mistook repetition for meaning. Human civilization has constructed a standardized progression of expectations so pervasive that most people never recognize it as an artificial structure at all. They treat it as if it were the natural order of existence rather than what it actually is. A cultural script so aggressively reinforced that deviation is perceived as failure. The sequence is recited so often it becomes reflexive. You will be educated. You will pursue additional education if possible. You will obtain employment. You will secure increasing economic stability. You will form a sanctioned partnership. You will produce children. You will labor for decades. You will retire briefly if fortunate. You will die. These are not discoveries about reality. They are inherited instructions. The individual is not asked whether the sequence is desirable or meaningful. They are informed that it is inevitable and that compliance will be rewarded with approval, belonging, and the illusion of purpose. The earliest milestone appears benign because it is framed as an act of empowerment. Education is described as enlightenment, intellectual expansion, preparation for autonomy. The actual structure of early schooling is far more concerned with behavioral conditioning than independent thought. Children are evaluated on punctuality, obedience, silence on command, and their ability to produce expected answers under timed conditions. Curiosity is tolerated only when it can be measured. Creativity is praised only when it does not disrupt efficiency. The grading system functions less as feedback and more as an early ranking mechanism that teaches the child where they stand within a hierarchy that has already been constructed without their consent. Graduation ceremonies amplify the illusion of liberation. Robes, speeches, applause, ritualized celebration. The spectacle implies that something extraordinary has occurred when in reality the individual has merely completed the first stage of institutional compliance. The celebration does not mark freedom. It marks successful progression through a process designed to prepare individuals for future participation in systems that will continue extracting their time. Higher education intensifies the pattern. Knowledge becomes secondary to credential acquisition. Degrees function as access keys to economic participation rather than evidence of intellectual mastery. Debt becomes normalized as a necessary sacrifice for opportunity. The individual is encouraged to believe that increased specialization guarantees stability, even as entire industries demonstrate the opposite in real time. The milestone is not the acquisition of understanding. It is the possession of certification recognized by gatekeepers who themselves operate within the same structure. Parents frequently respond to this milestone with disproportionate pride, not because of the knowledge gained, but because institutional acceptance is interpreted as validation of their own role in producing a compliant and successful participant in the system. The child's achievement becomes a reflection of parental competence, reinforcing the idea that the individual's life trajectory exists partly to justify earlier investment. The transition into employment represents the next major checkpoint. Work is framed not merely as a necessity, but as a defining element of identity. The question, "What do you do?" is rarely a request for a description of daily activity. It is an inquiry into social value. Employment becomes a shorthand for worth. Individuals are encouraged to pursue passion, yet the structure rewards availability, endurance, and tolerance for repetitive tasks far more reliably than it rewards genuine interest. Promotions are celebrated as evidence of progress, even when they represent only incremental changes in responsibility paired with marginal compensation increases. The milestone functions primarily as psychological reinforcement. It provides the sensation of movement within a system specifically engineered to maintain stability through controlled advancement. The most physically capable decades of life are allocated to labor, and the exchange is normalized through narratives equating productivity with virtue. Exhaustion becomes evidence of dedication rather than a signal that the arrangement may be fundamentally imbalanced. Parallel to career establishment is the property milestone. Home ownership is marketed as independence and stability, yet it often manifests as long-term financial obligation that reduces mobility and risk tolerance. Mortgages function as extended compliance contracts with economic institutions. Ownership becomes less about freedom and more about attachment to geographic and financial constraints. The celebration surrounding property acquisition is less about the structure itself and more about what it signifies: successful integration into the existing economic order. The milestone communicates reliability, predictability, and continued participation. Parents and peers respond with approval because the acquisition of property signals that the individual has accepted the long-term responsibilities expected of them. Marriage emerges as another heavily ritualized checkpoint. It is framed as the culmination of romantic development, yet its primary functions include legal consolidation of assets, social validation of partnership, and public reaffirmation of adherence to established relational norms. The ceremonial aspect is intentionally elaborate. Symbolic objects are exchanged. Formal declarations are made in front of witnesses. The spectacle transforms a private relationship into a community-endorsed contract. The intensity of parental reaction often reveals that the milestone is less about the well-being of the individuals involved and more about the continuation of a narrative that validates prior expectations. The event becomes proof that the established sequence remains intact. The emotional investment from observers frequently exceeds that of the participants themselves, suggesting that the milestone serves a collective psychological function rather than a purely personal one. Pregnancy is elevated above all other milestones as a moment of perceived transcendence. Biological reproduction is framed as miraculous, inevitable, and inherently virtuous. The substantial risks, permanent physiological changes, and long-term economic consequences are often minimized within celebratory narratives. The pregnant individual's autonomy is frequently overshadowed by communal investment in the outcome. Language shifts rapidly toward possessive terminology. The anticipated child is referenced as belonging to extended family before existing as an independent entity. The intensity of reaction demonstrates that the milestone is not solely about the creation of new life. It is about lineage continuation and retrospective justification of previous reproductive decisions. If reproduction does not occur, the absence is frequently treated as deviation rather than neutrality, revealing that the milestone is implicitly considered mandatory. Birth is framed as triumph regardless of circumstance. Survival is assumed. Trauma is minimized. Immediately, the cycle of evaluation begins again. Infant development is measured against standardized timelines. Walking, speaking, and feeding behaviors are tracked with obsessive attention. Variance becomes a source of anxiety rather than curiosity. Parents frequently integrate these milestones into their own identity, presenting the child's progress as evidence of successful caregiving. This dynamic is structurally reinforced by cultural narratives equating offspring performance with parental competence. The result is a feedback loop in which the child's autonomy is constrained by the need to maintain family reputation. As the child progresses through subsequent developmental stages, the milestone structure intensifies. Academic performance, extracurricular achievements, and social markers become increasingly visible indicators of future trajectory. Each success is publicly celebrated. Each deviation is scrutinized. The individual learns that progress is externally validated rather than internally defined. Adolescence introduces additional expectations surrounding romantic and sexual development. Experiences that should remain private become subjects of peer comparison and adult speculation. The absence of participation is often stigmatized, reinforcing the idea that progression through predetermined experiences is required for legitimacy. Adulthood reintroduces economic benchmarks. Salary thresholds, title acquisition, and financial accumulation become primary indicators of success. Midlife frequently introduces corrective milestones framed as reinvention or personal growth, though they often represent attempts to reconcile earlier expectations with emerging dissatisfaction. The persistence of the milestone structure ensures that even attempts at deviation are absorbed into the narrative as additional checkpoints rather than genuine departures. Retirement appears as the final institutional reward. It is presented as freedom earned through sustained labor, yet it arrives after the majority of physically capable years have been allocated to work. The asymmetry between effort invested and time remaining is rarely acknowledged during celebratory rituals. Subsequent milestones associated with aging, declining health, reduced independence, transition into assisted care are managed quietly as they do not reinforce the earlier narrative of progress. Death concludes the sequence with a final evaluative ritual. Eulogies frequently summarize existence by listing completed milestones: educational attainment, career duration, marital status, number of descendants. The implication is clear. A life is deemed successful based on adherence to the established script rather than the subjective experience of the individual who lived it. The milestone framework persists because it serves systemic functions. It reduces uncertainty by providing predictable trajectories. It stabilizes economic structures through standardized life patterns. It reinforces reproduction by presenting continuity as moral obligation. None of these functions inherently generate meaning. Meaning arises only when individuals consciously choose participation based on authentic desire rather than inherited expectation. When milestones are pursued solely because they are next in sequence, they function as mechanisms of compliance rather than fulfillment. The discomfort generated by those who reject or rearrange the sequence exposes the fragility of the structure. Deviation does not cause harm, yet it provokes disproportionate reaction. The response reveals that the milestones are not merely suggestions. They are structural reinforcements for a narrative that requires continuous participation to remain believable. When individuals opt out, observers are forced to confront the possibility that adherence was never mandatory. Milestones, therefore, possess no intrinsic authority. They derive significance exclusively from collective agreement. Without continuous reinforcement through celebration, comparison, and expectation, they would revert to what they actually are: optional experiences that may or may not hold personal value. The persistence of the structure is less a testament to its necessity and more evidence of humanity's preference for predictable scripts over uncertain autonomy.